Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen, Chapter 5. No sooner was her answer dispatched than Mrs. Dashwood indulged herself in the pleasure of announcing to her son-in-law and his wife that she was provided with a house and should accommodate them no longer than till everything was ready for her inhabiting it. They heard her with surprise. Mrs. John Dashwood said nothing, but her husband civilly hoped that she would not be settled far from Norland. She had great satisfaction in replying that she was going into Devonshire. Edward turned hastily towards her, and on hearing this, in a voice of surprise and concern, which required no explanation to her, repeated, "Devonshire? Are you indeed going there, so far from hence, and of what part of it?" She explained the situation. It was within 4 miles of northward Exeter. "It is but a carriage, a cottage," she continued, "but I hope to see many of my friends in it. A room or 2 can easily be added, and in my friends, if I find no difficulty in traveling so far for them to see me, I am sure I will find none in accommodating them." She concluded with a very kind invitation to Mr. and Mrs. John Dashwood to visit her at Barton, and Edgar she gave one with still greater affection. Though her late conversation with her daughter-in-law had made her resolve on remaining at Norland no longer than it was unavoidable, it had not produced the smallest effect on her in that point of which in principality intended. To separate Edward and Eleanor was far from being her object as ever, and she wished to show Mrs. John Dashwood by his pointed invitation to her brother how totally she disregarded her disapprobation of their match. Mr. John Dashwood told his mother again and again how exceedingly sorry he was that she had taken a house at such a distance from Norland as to prevent his being of any service to her in removing her furniture. He really felt conscientiously vexed on the occasion, and for a very exertion to which he had limited the performance of his promise of his father was by this arrangement rendered impracticable. The furniture was all sent round by water. It chiefly consisted of household linen, plate, china, and books, with a handsome pianoforte of Marianne's. Mrs. Dashwood saw the packages depart with a sigh. She could not help but feeling at heart that as Miss Dashwood's income would be so trifling in comparison with their own, that she shouldn't have any of the handsome articles of furniture. Mrs. Dashwood took the house for a 12-month. It was ready furnished, and she might have immediate possession. No difficulty arose on either side of the agreement, and she waited only for the disposal of her effects at Norland, and to determine her future household, before she set off for the West, and this, as she was exceedingly rapid in the performance of everything that interested her, was soon done. The horses which were left by her husband had been sold soon after his death, and an opportunity now offered of disposing of her carriage. She agreed to sell that likewise, at the earnest advice of her eldest daughter, and for the comfort of her children, had she consulted only with her own wishes, that she would have kept it. But the discretion of Eleanor prevailed. Her wisdom too limited the number of their servants to 3, 2 maids and a man, with whom they were speedily provided amongst those who had formed their establishment at Norland. The man and one of the maids were sent off immediately to Devonshire to prepare for the house of the mistress's arrival, and for Lady Middleton was entirely unknown to Mrs. Dashwood. She preferred going directly to the cottage to be a visitor at Barton Park, and she relied so undoubtingly on Sir John's description of the house as to feel no curiosity to examine it herself until she entered it as her own. Her eagerness to be gone from Norland was preserved from diminution by evident satisfaction of her daughter-in-law and the prospect of her removal, a satisfaction which was feebly attempted to be concealed under the cold invitation of her to defend her departure. Now was the time when her son-in-law's promise to his father might be particular propriety to be fulfilled. Since he had neglected to do it in the first coming of the estate, their acquitted house might be looked on as the most suitable period for its accomplishment. But Miss Dashwood began shortly to give over every hope of the kind, and to be convinced From the gray general drift of his discourse that his assistance extended no further than that of their maintenance for 6 months at Norland, he so frequently talked of their increasing expenses in household and of perpetual demands upon his purse, which a man of any consequence of the world would be calculation exposed to, that he seemed rather to be standing in need of money more than himself to be having any design of giving it away. In very few weeks from the day which brought Sir John Middleton's first letter to Norland, everything was so far settled in their fortune abode as to enable Mrs. Dashwood and her daughters to begin their journey. Many were tears shed by them of their last adieus to place so much beloved. Dear, dear Norland, said Marianne. She wandered alone before the house on the last evening of their being there. When shall I cease to regret you? When learn to feel home elsewhere? Oh, happy house, could you know that I suffered in now viewing you from the spot, from where hence perhaps I may view you no more. And you, ye well-known trees, but you will continue the same. No leaf will decay because you are removed, because we are removed, nor any branches become notionless, although we can observe you no longer. No, you will continue to be the same, unconscious of the pleasure, of the regret of the occasion, and insensible of any change in those who walk under your shade, but who will remain to enjoy you.